Hey guys, Mr. Gibson here. Before I take you guys through some FRQs, I was looking at some FRQs from last year, and they did something a little strange, and I want to talk about uh, that little bit of strangeness before I show you guys a video, and this will be an opportunity to review marginal propensity to consume, and the multiplier effect. Okay, so that's what we're going to go through here because I just kind of want to talk about the difference in the multiplier effect, marginal propensity to consume versus marginal propensity to save, so on and so forth. But anyway, um, so let's get started and talk about marginal propensity to consume, MPC, and it is some sort of percent of disposable income used to consume or consumer spending, I should say. Okay. Better spell consumer, right? Okay. Consumer spending. Apologize. All right. So, like if you have an MPC of 80%, that means that your disposable income, that means your after tax income, you're going to take 80% of that and spend it on consumer goods and services. The other 20% you're going to save. So that gets us to this other idea of MPS, marginal propensity to save. Okay. And you could probably write in the definition there, but the definition I want you guys to know about is if you're uh, if you're either consuming or saving, then MPS is simply 1 minus MPC. Okay. Example of this, obviously, if you have an MPC of 0.9, that's going to mean that your MPS, marginal propensity to save, is 1 minus 0.9, and that'll equal 0.1. Okay. So your disposable income, your after tax income, you use 90% of that on consumer goods and services. The other 10% of it you take to the bank and you put it in savings, and it's or some other financial intermediary, bank, mutual fund, pension plan, what have you, and you simply uh, that goes into your savings, and of course that's loaned out and everything else, and that can uh, go into back into the economy as loans and some interest sensitive spending, whether that's consumer spending or mostly investment spending. Okay, so just a quick note on that. All right, so why this is important is this right here. Pardon me a second. My bad, you guys. 1 second here. And give myself a little more room. Probably need a couple more pages just in case. Bear with me. And I'm through. Okay. Go back up here and start over again. All right. So this becomes important because we have what's called the multiplier effect. Okay. And the multiplier effect says when you have some sort of injection of spending into the economy, if you have some sort of injection of spending into the economy, it's not a one off thing. Okay. That spending begets or creates more spending. Okay. So, say the government spends $50 billion, or actually in this case of the United States government has put in $2 trillion. Okay, it's going to generate more spending than $2 trillion because if you have your $1,200 that the government's going to give folks, okay, folks are going to take that $1,200, spend it initially, okay, um, then that $1,200 goes to someone else who then takes that cash and they spend it again. And then that cash goes into other businesses and stuff and that spends it again. And it just is an infinite process from there. Now, the one little caveat before that, theoretically, you could create an infinite amount of spending out of that way, is that people don't just spend all of it. Okay. Some of it you save. Okay. And we come to a formula that tells us, okay, how much spending can be created. Okay. It's going to have to be the initial amount that you create or that you spend. And it's going to be affected by this marginal propensity to consume. Okay. The higher the marginal propensity to consume, the more spending that this will create. The lower the marginal propensity to consume, the more savings that goes on, the more cash is taken out of that flow of spending and um, is put aside and it doesn't generate as much spending. Okay. So, um, savings not a bad thing. Like we talked about, it can create more investment spending, which has greater capital formation, which will lead to more long term growth. That's kind of a whole other subject of that. But for right now, if we're going to have government spending, I'm going to say initial spending. It doesn't have to be government spending, but I mean, it could be something like an increase in exports or something like that. All right, government spending. And we have this multiplier. And the formula for the multiplier is 1 over 1 minus MPC. If you have any interest in seeing where this comes from, this is simply um, the formula for an infinite geometric series. Okay, the sum of an infinite geometric series. This is its formula. That's where it comes from mathematically. But anyway, for right now, all you got to really know is that is the multiplier. Okay, equals. I'm just going to call it total. The total spending. Okay, after everything's said and done, how much spending will be in total. All right. This right here, from here on out, I'm just going to label that as this just big M. Okay. And then the other thing is, if you guys notice, well, 1 minus MPC, that simply equals marginal propensity to save. Okay. This is what we call the government spending multiplier. Okay. And the reason for that is when the government spends um, on goods and services, there is an actual initial spending that all that cash gets spent. Okay. That's different than if this were a tax cut or a government transfer. Okay. So that's why I wanted to make this video, is to distinguish something a little different. Okay. So let's just kind of think about this real quick. If we have, let's say, a tax cut or a government transfer, I'm going to put an I for initial spending. Okay. So let's say that this $2 trillion is all in tax cuts um, and government transfers. The thing with a tax cut and a government transfer versus a just pure government spending on goods and services is you don't have that initial spending. So if the government spends $50 billion on goods and services, then there'll be a first round of spending of $50 billion. Whereas with transfers or tax cuts, people get $50 billion into their pocket, but they're not going to spend all $50 billion. Some of that is going to be saved. So that initial round of spending is not going to be as high. Okay. But we can still use marginal propensity to consume to figure that out. So this I for initial spending, okay, so let's say that's that $50 billion, is going to be subtracted by the initial spending times the marginal propensity to save. Okay. So that's what percent of their paycheck they're going to uh, spend, or they're going to put away as savings. Okay. Now, if I factor this, I can factor out the I, and I'm left with 1 minus marginal propensity to save. Okay. So we actually come up with this formula for transfers and taxes that's 1 minus MPS, which is actually the MPC, y'all, but we won't worry about that, times this big M, which is our multiplier, okay? And this will equal the total. All right. Okay. So let's see an example for good measure here. So let's say that the government is deciding, okay, do we spend $2 trillion on government transfers or just government spending? Okay, so here's our $2 trillion, or I'll just say $2 for short. And if I'm going to use our government spending multiplier, if this is all going to be spent on goods and services, okay, I'm going to do 1 minus MPC. Let's say the MPC is 90%, like we said at the top, or 0.9. So 1 over 1 minus 0.9. Okay. That's going to give us the total. The total. All right. Hold up. All right. So let's just do a little math here. We're going to have 2 again. 1 over 1 minus MPC is 0.1. Okay. This will be 2 times 1 over 1/10. Keep it, change it, flip it, multiply by the reciprocal means that this will be 2 times 10, and that's going to equal $20 trillion in total spending. Okay. That's if we use this government spending multiplier and we spend it on uh, goods and services. Uh, if the government spends it on goods and services, in total, it will generate $20 trillion um, in total spending and GDP. Okay. Now, let's see what the difference is. That this is purely transfers and taxes. All right. And tax cuts, that is. So that means, all right, 2. And this time, some of that's going to be used on savings. Okay. 1 minus 0.1. Okay. Because that's the marginal propensity to save is 0.1. You're going to save 10% of this times our multiplier, which is 1 over 1 minus 0.9. So that doesn't really change. Okay. It's going to equal the total. Well, the easy thing here is, well, I already know that this part, this multiplier is going to end up equaling 10. So let me go ahead and just write in 10 for this. Okay. All right. 1 minus uh, 1 minus zero point 0.1 is 0.9, or 90% of 2. 90% of 2 is 18, or 1.8, I'm sorry, times 10. So that means that the total spending will be 18 trillion rather than 20 trillion. Okay. And that's because of that initial, um, because with government spending on goods and services, there's an initial $2 trillion that's spent. There's not that initial $2 trillion spent. Initially, there's only $1.8 trillion that's spent. Okay. So that's why it's slightly less if you're doing tax cuts or transfers. Okay. If you're trying to boost the GDP, you're going to cut taxes. So this would actually be negative 18 if we're talking about um, tax cuts. Okay. You want to cut taxes by negative 2. Oh, it wouldn't be negative. I'm sorry. But you'd want to cut taxes by 2 trillion to get to this. Okay. Government spent, government transfers would be a positive 2 trillion. Okay. That's another little note to make. Okay. You see a lot of questions that'll ask, um, what's more effective, government transfers and tax cuts versus government spending? Well, government spending is more effective because there's a greater multiplier effect, and this was just shown mathematically. The main point I wanted to make here, and we didn't see this much in class, was that I wanted to give you guys this formula and show you guys where it comes from. Okay, make you guys think about that, because we're gonna have to use it in one of these problems that was from last year. Okay, thanks for your attention.